Hello, I'm Susan Regan, and I'm very pleased to say that on Connecticut Valley Views today, our guest is Jim Cameron. He is a longtime commuter advocate and a commentator on transportation issues in their state. In 1993, he joined Connecticut Metro North Rail Commuter Council, where he served for 11 years as vice chairman and 4 years as chairman. Since 2003, he has authored a weekly newspaper column and blog, Talking Transportation, which appears in the Connecticut Mirror. So, Jim, you have been concentrating most of your written commentary on train services, Metro North, Amtrak, and the Shoreline East. If you could, for our audience, who may not be familiar with these different rail lines if they don't use them, please briefly describe each and how they interface with each other.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be
Delighted.
here.
Delighted.
Let's start with the big one, which people may be most familiar with, and that's Metro North. Metro North is actually run by a quasi-state agency in New York, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the MTA. But Metro North is the legacy of what was the New Haven Railroad's commuter service. Those are the trains that run from Grand Central all the way up to New Haven, and on the branch lines up to New Canaan, Danbury, and Waterbury. So that's Metro North. Now, moving east from New Haven, there is Shoreline East. Shoreline East is a commuter railroad owned and sort of operated by the Connecticut Department of Transportation. They use Amtrak crews, but that's because it's Amtrak's tracks. And Shoreline East runs from New Haven to New London. Not all the trains make it to New London. Most of them stop in Old Saybrook. There's another one which we didn't mention, and that's the Hartford line. The Hartford line is a state commuter railroad that runs from New Haven north through Hartford to Springfield. And that's mostly commuter service. Now, overlaying much of this is Amtrak. Amtrak is the National Passenger Railroad Corporation, and they run trains on the Northeast Corridor between Boston and Washington along our coastline. They also run some trains up the I-91 corridor, I'll say, from New Haven to Hartford to Springfield and up into Vermont, even points further north. So there are actually 4 different railroads that are up for consideration if you're looking for an alternative to all of that traffic on I-95 and 91.
Well, with regard to, so Amtrak is the sort of overriding or major one. Could you give us a sense, if you can, the number of commuters for each one, certain percentage of each one?
Well, Metro North has the largest, or had the largest ridership, something like 250, 300,000 commuters a day, commuting mostly from Connecticut into New York City and back again. They're trying very hard to develop what they call the intrastate commuter. So somebody who might be living in Fairfield but works in Greenwich, they could take Metro North as well too, even though they're not going to Grand Central. So the fares within the state, intrastate, are kept deliberately lower. Much smaller ridership on Shoreline East, maybe in the 30 to 40,000 passengers, and that's going down because they've just reduced service. And similar numbers, but also a little bit smaller on the Hartford line running north-south between New Haven, Hartford, Springfield. Amtrak doesn't really think of itself as carrying commuters. They're an interstate, between-state railroad, and they effectively own people that are going between Boston and New York City and Washington. In the good old days, you'd take the Eastern Shuttle, but it is now faster and just a little bit cheaper to take the train, much faster than it used to be. So Acela, that high-speed train, that captures a lot of the people going between those major metropolitan areas.
Well, I'm going to ask you the obvious question. We've had COVID basically for about 2.5 years. And people have been commuting, if you will, or communicating with their offices digitally and through the internet and the remote users. So have we seen a decline from the numbers that were before COVID?
Huge decline. As soon as COVID hit, ridership dropped 90%. The
Wow.
only people that were taking the train were first responders, people who couldn't telecommute, nurses, doctors, plumbers, auto mechanics. I mean, you can't call in your job on Zoom if you have to be putting hands on a patient or a piece of equipment. So ridership plummeted completely. And that was reflected on all the lines that we've mentioned, including Amtrak. To their credit, Metro North never reduced the service. Even though the ridership went completely down, they kept the trains running because they saw themselves as a valuable public service. People needed to get to their jobs. They might not have had access to a car, or they really depended on the train. They have been clawing their way back up in ridership as people were encouraged or told that they needed to get back to the office a couple of days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week in some industries. Ridership has come back, but it has pretty much flatlined at 70% of pre-COVID levels. Now, that is worse on Shoreline East, where the service was cut and the ridership never came back. Their ridership is way down in the 20 percentile range as well, too. On the Hartford line, the ridership came back a little bit stronger, but nowhere near as strong as those who were going to or from New York City to their jobs. The implications of that are immense. And that is, with reduced ridership, the railroad was losing, all these railroads were losing money with every ticket they sold pre-COVID, even when the ridership was standing room only. The tickets never covered the cost of the ride. The subsidy by taxpayers did. So it's, as I say, it's a public service in some regards. If the ticket could pay for the cost of the ride, we'd have private companies running passenger railroads in this country again. But that hasn't happened for, decades at this point. So even when the ridership was way up here, they were losing money. When the ridership goes down like this, they're hemorrhaging money. And those deficits had to be made up somehow. Three things that the railroad really has control over in terms of costs are the fares, the service, and labor. They committed early on not to lay anybody off, which was a very smart move. They have raised the fares, and they have cut the service on all of the lines except the Hartford line. And that's my biggest concern, is that as you reduce the service, you give people less reason to think about taking the train, and that just sends ridership down further, sends the deficit up higher, and then you get into a vicious cycle of raising fares, reducing service. The industry calls it the death spiral, and I don't want to see our passenger railroads go into a death spiral.
Well, that's the obvious conclusion when it comes to a consumer who says, you're raising prices on me and cutting back service, so I'm being harmed. Is there anything that could justify handling it in a different way? And actually, you mentioned something I wanted to say. When they run into that deficit, and our tax dollars are helping to mitigate their loss of return on investment, I guess. Plus, do they also lose employees, or they don't need as many employees to run the trains? How does that affect? So they're not doing it themselves. They're cutting off their nose to spite their face, as it were. So how would you see that they might mitigate this to encourage more readership? I mean, maybe value points or something. How many times you ride the train per month, you get something in return. I mean, we do this.
How many hours do we have here, Susan? I could. Well, first of all, let me.
Well, I wish we had many for you.
Let me address a couple of things. Why aren't people taking the train? Maybe because they're working from home and their employer allows that, and they suddenly have discovered, oh my gosh, I don't have to be spending $300, $400 a month for a commutation ticket, spending 2.5 hours a day on the train going to and from my office. I don't need to go to work to be able to do my work. So in some ways, this has been a sea change in attitude. Yeah, you got to go into the office sometimes. You got to see your coworkers. You can't live on Zoom the rest of your life. But think of the quality of life that this has afforded when people realize that work from home says, hey, I can meet my kid's school bus at the end of the day, or I can go see Johnny play in the game, or I don't have to worry about, being on a train when some parent-teacher conference is happening.
Or getting sickness, being sick.
Or being sick, and then spreading the germs to other people.
Right.
I gotta go into work today, boss. Right.
Right.
So I don't think that's going to change. And that's what the railroad has not been willing to address. I wrote a column at the end of 2021 predicting that this would happen. Exactly this. I said, it's wishful thinking for Metro North to assume ridership is going to come back strong as soon as we get vaccines. We got the vaccines. COVID is still around. People aren't getting their booster shots as much as they should. People are still getting COVID, but they're not going back to the office. Now, that could be because it's a strong labor market where employers don't have the clout to say, show up at the job, Bob, or you're fired. Maybe they don't want to do that quite yet. But I think it's also a reflection of this technology that we're using right now to discuss this topic. I don't have to go up to your studios to be a guest on your show. And I find that delightful. It saves me time and a lot of pain and anguish is being in traffic as well, too. Now, how do we get people to want to go back to the train? That's the larger question. Well, raising fares doesn't necessarily help. Finding some other alternatives. Like some of the commuter railroads in the United States were doing fun things on the very slow days. The slowest work day in terms of ridership is Fridays. That's where they've cut most of the trains on the recent schedule. Well, if not a lot of people taking the trains in the first place, why don't you do like a commuter railroad in Seattle did? Offer free tickets on Friday. Try the train, I think there are a lot of people who, if they've not been on a train in a long time and they're sitting in I-95 or I-91 or on the Merritt Parkway cursing traffic, if they tried the train, they might say, hey, this might actually work. So I think there need to be incentives, more carrots and fewer sticks to say, try being a commuter. We'll give you a free ticket, or we'll give you a free ride, or we'll give you a discount if you want to take your family. Taking your family into New York City on the train makes no economic sense whatsoever. It gets really expensive. If you got 3 or 4 people, put them in a car, you'll pay for parking and you'll put up with traffic, but you won't be paying through the nose for 4 seats on an otherwise empty train. Sure.
Well, I see. That's what I'm talking about. A marketing plan. They need to hire a marketing group who thinks as you do with your knowledge, and they should probably be consulting with you since you've had so many years.
Well, they don't consult with me.
Well, they should be consulting.
They listen and they respond, and
you have the overview. Okay. Well, with that being said, the state has ordered $315 million of new unpowered rail cars from Alstom, I guess made in Mexico, apparently.
Yes.
It's on the Hartford-Springfield line, which will require the separate purchase of new diesel, fossil fuels, locomotives. And Governor Lamont has stated that he wanted to improve the trip times into New York City by 30 minutes. How is all that worked out?
Okay, 2 different pieces. Let's take it one at a time.
Sure.
Yes, they're ordering new cars because the cars that they run on the Hartford line, which is not electrified and requires a diesel locomotion, are really old. They're older than the passengers. They're very ancient. They need to be replaced.
Okay.
But they may also use them on the other branch lines that are not electrified as well, too, the Danbury and the Waterbury branch. They're not going to be just diesel locomotives. They're going to be dual mode, which means that on the Hartford line, they run diesel, and when they get to New Haven, they can raise the pantograph and run electric. So you could have effectively a 1-seat ride from Hartford all the way to Grand Central. The whole idea of a 1-seat ride, not having to change trains or wait for a connection, is very attractive to encouraging ridership.
So it's a hybrid train.
The locomotives will be hybrid. The
Okay.
cars I think the cars themselves, I wrote the story, but I can't remember the number. I think they're about $5 million each.
Wow.
Unpowered. When they
Wow.
bought the electric cars, the ones with the red stripe on them that run on Metro North, 10, 12 years ago, those were like $3 million, but they had engines. They were built into the cars themselves. So these cars are going to be very expensive. I think part of the attitude is, it's federal money. It's Biden Build Back Better. It's infrastructure money. Why should we care? Well, they have to match some of the money as well, too. So there will be some new cars. Now, the other issue you raised was the governor, in his first inaugural address, talked about what he called the 30-30-30 plan. He thinks it should take no more than 30 minutes to get from Hartford to New Haven, from New Haven to Stamford, or Stamford to Grand Central. Physically impossible.
Okay.
The New Haven Railroad, in its crack days of running passenger trains, never could achieve those speeds. That's not going to happen with these tracks, with this signal system, with this equipment. So the governor is smoking dope when he promises people 30-30-30. I'm going to get you. So it's such a fast ride. You're going to have to be stretching back in the chair like this. So I called BS on that. Didn't get a Christmas card from the governor last year. And then he said, well, it's more of an aspiration. We want to speed up the trains. Well, this was 4 years ago, 5 years ago that he made this speech. Hasn't happened. They got a couple of express trains from New Haven that run nonstop at 5 o'clock in the morning on their way into New York City. Just under, I think it's 85 minutes instead of the 60 minutes that he thought would be possible.
Right.
So even that, a little bit faster, but it's not achieving those numbers. So don't listen to what politicians say. Watch what they do.
Absolutely.
Don't take them at their word, because they're not doing what they said they were going to do.
All
and
right.
I got nothing against Ned Lamont.
Sure.
I've said the same thing about Republicans, independent. Yeah, I don't care who's in office. If you're not doing what you said you were going to do, I'm going to call you on it. Sorry.
Well, that's all right. Theoretically, it's the voters at the end of the day. They do watch what the politicians say and what they do, but a lot of them, there's so much apathy. There's so much apathy now in voting. We've got the municipals coming up very shortly, and the apathy in voting or choosing a different person. And you hear often in many of the media shows, they speak about the fact that if you see the politician often enough and they're at your cookout, or they attend a baseball game and they say hello to you or whatever, you vote for the person who's friendly or the person you like, not what they've done. So it's
the power of incumbency.
Yes, exactly. Well, now, are there other things that could be attractive on the train? Have they upped? Could you watch movies while you're on the train like you do in an airplane?
There is no Wi-Fi on Metro North. There has never been Wi-Fi on Metro North. However, the legislature, I think 2 years ago, did give the Department of Transportation $23 million to put Wi-Fi on Metro North. I'm teasing an upcoming column. Hasn't happened yet, and I'm trying to find out where did the money go and how's that Wi-Fi project coming.
Yes.
And by the way, the Wi-Fi is going to be no better than the cell phone reception. So if you have trouble on your own cell phone and you lose a signal on a train, Wi-Fi on the car is not going to make it any better, as Amtrak discovered. These things do not operate with satellite dishes on the roof of the train, okay?
Okay.
They did have, for many years, a quiet car. The front car on the train in rush hour was the quiet car. No, it's supposed to be a library-like atmosphere. No loud conversations. No playing Zoom on your iPhone or watching movies. Just keep it down. People want to take a nap. They want to just have some chill time. That was eliminated during COVID. It has not come back, despite protestations from people that found it a nice amenity to have. And it doesn't look like it's going to be coming back. So, every time they take a step forward, then they take 2 steps back, trying things out. It's a monopoly, Susan. We don't have a choice of carriers. If we had somebody competing against Metro North with a real consumer-oriented focus, offering things like, remember the bar cars that we used to have? Well,
I was going to ask you about food. I was going to say there should be some sort of a,
how about a guy with a
McDonald's,
cart?
Wendy's car.
Well, have a guy with a cart selling coffee in the morning, or snacks or something to make the ride a little more enjoyable. But it's pretty much BYO. You got to bring your own.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got another subject here, and this is something I'm totally unfamiliar with. First mile, last mile. What's the translation of that referral? And do I understand correctly that Connecticut Transit bus services are linked somewhat to train service? How are they?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. No, the Connecticut bus service is not necessarily scheduled to meet trains. It should be. I mean, the first mile, last mile is a industry term that says, I want to take the train. Okay, I live about a mile from a train station right over there. How am I going to get to that train station? Now, if I was in better shape, I might walk it, but in the middle of the winter, I don't want to walk it. I can't get a parking permit. There's a 5-year waiting list for parking permits at my train station. This is true of most of the train stations. So if I want to take the train, I have to get to the station. That's the first mile. How do I get there? Uber, something like a third of all their business in Connecticut is to or from train stations. It's surprising. Some places like Norwalk, Westport, there may be a couple others, offer what they call microtransit. It's almost like an on-demand shuttle service. It'll take you from your house to the train station, and for $1, $2, $3, whatever it is. But that's the first mile. Now, the last mile is, if you're going to Grand Central in New York City, you're fine. You got subways, you got city bike, you can walk, you can grab a cab, you can do anything you want. But if people are coming up here, let's say people are coming up to Stamford on business or Bridgeport, and they get off the train and they're supposed to go to a business address, they're going to go, there's no map in the train station? There's no map in the train station that says, here's where you are, and here's the address you're going to. Look how close it is. No, I've seen people get off the train in Stamford, wait in line to get a taxi, and say, take me to Swiss Bank, when they were still up and running. And the guy would say, sure. And he'd drive around the corner and drop him off. It was 2 blocks.
Oh, boy.
So that's the last mile. We have to solve some of the railroads. Like there's a new for-profit passenger railroad in Florida called Brightline. They offer free shuttle within 5 miles of a train station, to or from the train station, and from your destination train station to or from wherever it is you want to go. That's thinking like a commuter. That's solving the whole solution, not just the how do I get on from Bridgeport to Grand Central part of it.
Right. Yeah, well, people do need to know where they are and what their options are, and I think that needs to be clarified. All right. Am I correct in saying there's some talk about adjusting bus services and that will add some additional pressure to commuters? Is that true? And how so?
Well, in addition to the rail cuts that started at the beginning of November, there were a number of changes in bus routes by CT Transit, which is the state-owned transit agency. Some of them were shortened, some of them were extended, but I think it's time to do a major reevaluation of the entire bus system in this state. It's really a legacy of the old days of trolley lines. I mean, think of where do the buses run and why do they run there? Do they run to population centers? Do they run to places of employment? The buzzword in Hartford has always, in the last decade at least, been transit-oriented development. Let's put some money into developing train stations and then develop around them, put in housing and offices and condos, etc., in the hopes that the people that live there or work there wouldn't have to have a car. They'd be able to take the train to or from wherever it is they were going. And the big question is, with transit ridership down, is that going to still be attractive to private developers? Are they going to want to invest millions of dollars building next to a train station that's just had its service cut? I don't think so, but maybe that's just me.
Well, the other I want to say obvious again question is that people who live in a condominium or a house or an apartment or whatever near the train station, they've got to put up with that noise all the time. So that may be a put off for some people.
The electric trains are pretty quiet. They really are. That's how they run people over so often. People don't.
Okay.
Trespassers don't get. Trespassers literally don't hear the train coming. They don't know what's going to hit them.
Okay. I guess in your mind, you think all of these people coming to the train station and could crime be up and whatever. Being close, I think, to the transportation, that if it's going to work for you, I think is terrific.
There's safety in numbers. A crowd, yes. I'd rather be in a crowd in a train station.
That's true, as long as nobody yells fire. Or we don't have, God forbid, any more shootings. People go into large crowds and then start shooting off guns. All right. So pricing of tickets continue to going up. Where do you think the tax money, how are we going to raise it? We're just going to say commuter trains, here's your line item.
We got the money. I mean, we just have to think of transportation as being a public service. Why do my tax dollars living in Lower Fairfield County pay for a football stadium in East Hartford? Because I'm part of a larger state, okay? And yes, we need to subsidize the fares in Lower Fairfield County, all of Lower Fairfield County, because 40% of all the taxes that are paid in this state are paid by people that live there because there's a train to take them to their high-paying job in New York City.
Sure.
You take away that train and that reliability, they're not going to live here. They're not going to pay those taxes. Yeah. So, maybe you're saving a couple $100,000 by cutting trains on a Friday. But if you've discouraged one high earner from paying taxes in this state and him saying, maybe I go to Westchester instead, that's not the solution. So the money is there. It just needs it's a matter of priorities. I'm sorry.
Right. I don't want to cut you off, but I think this is a very informative and entertaining interview. And I'd like you to give the contact information and website for people to continue to follow you.
Sure. If you want to see my column, which is called Talking Transportation, it runs in ctmirror.org, CT Mirror. And if you want to get in touch with me, just go to the commuteractiongroup.org, and you'll find all the contact information there as well. Google me. People seem to find me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on every social media platform. Reach out. If you have a question, if you have a complaint especially, let me know. I want to show you how to get that solved. Okay, terrific. Well, thank you very much for your time again. We very much appreciate it. And this is Susan Regan signing off today. Please see all of our shows on ctvalleyviews.com.